Whoa! It's me, Adcula.
Please stop.
Oh, sorry, it's Adam.
Hi, Adam.
And this is.
I'm Dave, yes.
And this is.
Fiction.
Or.
Non-fiction. Fiction or non-fiction.
Hey, so this is the show where we look at viral news stories, we look at urban legends, unpack them, and figure out if they are true or not. And I was trying to go for a spooky sort of introduction, Dave, because this happens to be, I guess, our de facto Halloween episode.
Yes, and today we're going to be talking about the, I don't know if it's a myth, but it's a thing that happens every year. Whenever Halloween comes around, parents will often say, be careful, check your candy, someone might try to poison or tamper with it.
Oh, yeah, that would happen all the time when I was a child. They always said, make sure all your candy is wrapped up. If anything is open or you're not certain, show us. That was always a huge concern when I was growing up. I imagine it was the exact same with you.
Same for me. But also, just want to say, we're going to talk about the history of this and also how many reports have come out and how many haven't. We should also stress, although we're talking about this, you should still be aware and, check stuff for your kids for Halloween because you never know.
Well, I think it's like any sort of food. Like, you always want to check and make sure the packaging hasn't been tampered with or there's any issue, regardless. But with that said, from what I'm gathering, the question is Halloween candy, is there actually a history of it being tampered with or poisoned?
Kind of.
Oh, okay.
So basically, there's been a lot of studies, but there's also been a lot of conflicting stories. So we're going to get into a little bit of that. But basically, the whole premise of today's show is how often does this happen? Has Halloween candy been poisoned? Has anyone been hurt? And we're going to dig into a bit of this. So there's been many reports, and I'm just going to reference a few sources here that I got this information. One of which is I tried to get more recent things. A fairly recent article from the CBC Health, and it's a very in-depth and covers a lot of the points I'm going to discuss here.
Who's that article by the way?
I'm just looking for the author. Adam Miller did this on October 31st of 2019. It was published on the CBC website, and there's a story. The story is called Trick or Truth, the real story behind Halloween candy tampering.
That's such a great name. That we should have named
Trick
that this show.
Trick or Truth. And then the other places I got some information from was the History Channel has a story from 2017 called How Americans Became Convinced Their Halloween Candy Was Poisoned. And there's something they stress on their site was citations and information, and they always reference how they fact check for fairness and accuracy. And if something is inaccurate, there's a link to contact them. But this has been out for a while, that article. And then, of course, there's a well-known author who is a professor of sociology and criminal justice that has been dealing with this and has written a book and has been updating data every year.
Is it R.L. Stein?
No, it's someone named Joel Best. He studied at the University of Delaware. He specializes in topics such as social problems and deviance. He had a book out in the 90s, and he had this thing he kind of came up with, a theory of Halloween sadism. He believes that this is not a thing. It's just kind of what people say, and it's just kind of buying into that myth of Halloween, it's spooky, you got to be careful, that sort of thing. But that being said, there are actually cases where things have happened.
Oh, so there is truth behind these stories.
There is truth, and there's a very extreme case, which we will mention, but that is often not counted for the details that I will mention soon. But in general, there has been cases, there has been news stories throughout the years about Halloween candy being tampered, things like that. But no one has been seriously injured, and a lot of times people thought it was a Halloween candy tampering, and it turned out to be something else.
Oh,
so,
interesting.
I'll reference just a few cases here. One of the biggest things people say is, watch out for razor blades in apples. Personally, whenever I got an apple, I was like, you know what? Maybe I'll just get my own apple. But No one has been, according to information from the CBC article, from data done and reported through the Canadian Food Inspection Agency from April 2008 to October 2019, there was really no cases. There was 2 cases referred to the local police, but no illnesses or deaths were reported in any of these cases. But another thing it stresses that tracking of incidences of candy being tampered is difficult because it kind of falls under a few different categories. In terms of charges, it generally falls under charge of mischief. But there's no database of this information.
Well, and it's going to be hard to track, too, because I would imagine trying to actually link an illness or something like food poisoning relating to candy itself is very challenging for people and for authorities to do.
Yeah, so it has happened, but fortunately, nothing really serious has happened except for the one case which I will mention. I'm just going to reference a couple historical cases. In 1959, in North America, there was a dentist in California who distributed 450 laxative-laced candies to children, 30 who fell ill. He was charged, and that was it. Some kids got ill, but obviously because of what happened to the candy.
Well, yeah. Well, it's kind of interesting that this perpetrator was a dentist. Was this sort of like revenge for all the cavities that he'd have to fix after Halloween?
Maybe, and that's fitting based on another story which happened. It was a high-profile case that made headlines in the U.S., and it took place in New York in 1964. A 47-year-old mother from Greenlawn, New York, handed out bags of treats that contained arsenic-laced candy traps, metal mesh, scrubbing pads, and dog biscuits.
Oh, my God.
So basically, she was so annoyed by the Halloween custom that she later reported that she didn't mean it maliciously, but she handed these things out instead of candy, which obviously is a problem.
I mean, you're saying it's not malicious, but you're handing out arsenic-laced objects to children.
So this was another story that was in the news that also kind of made people more cautious, and you should be cautious. But obviously there was other issues at play here with this person.
It definitely sounds like a mental health issue was going on with her. Yeah.
It was. And let's see if we can find a more modern case. So in 2001 in Vancouver, a girl's Halloween candy was said to have been deliberately poisoned after she fell ill and died of heart failure after eating it.
Oh, no.
Now, they confiscated the candies, and then in the days that followed, it was determined that actually it was from an unknown medical condition and there was no poison in her system at all. So there was a candy confiscation order issued at the time, like, don't eat this, stuff like that. Just like when there's like food warnings with like certain products you get at the grocery store, don't buy this type of lettuce or this type of meat, etc.
Yeah, like consumer recall reports.
Yeah.
So this was attributed to poison candy, but it had nothing to do with it. So this was more just people assuming it was a case of tampered candy rather than what actually unfortunately led to this young person's death, which was a rare heart disease. Yeah.
So, I will get to the more serious case in a moment, but the biggest danger for people in terms of getting injured or hurt at Halloween is not necessarily candy. Can you guess what it might actually be?
Well, I would imagine it is getting hit by vehicles because children wearing masks or people walking around in the dark, they don't see vehicles are coming and they get struck. Is that true? Is that
is the other case here?
Okay.
More people are harmed from vehicles, and unfortunately a lot are due to drunk driving related issues. But it's another reason why people say, watch where you're going when you're crossing the street. If you're wearing like a all dark costume, be careful. Try to wear bright colors, things like that. So yeah, according to this article here on the History Channel from 2017, according to the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration, 45% of all Halloween fatalities between 2011 and 2015 involved a drunk driver. So 56 people in 2020 were killed on Halloween night because of similar reasons. So there's a lot, to say for that. That's a completely different thing. Obviously, we have all these things going on. People want their kids to be safe going out for Halloween, and you should be cautious. But we're just trying to delve into where this myth, not really a myth, urban legend, I guess, has come from. People say this every year. Mm-hmm. Is it really a thing that's happening? Well, like I said earlier, kind of. And another thing it kind of also stems from is there was a case a while ago, just before. Let me hold on. I'm just going to find this.
Okay, I'm just going to interject one thing while
Yes.
you're looking that up. Now, for anyone out there listening, if you have children that are going to go trick-or-treating this year, we actually do have books and resources at the public library that give you advice on how to ensure your child safely trick-or-treats. Just go to windsorpubliclibrary.com and you can look up some books on that. And we also have a video that our staff have created on our YouTube page, so please check that out. It gives helpful advice and tips for how to safely and successfully trick-or-treat. Now, as you said, Dave, that these tend to be not exactly urban legends. They are based in some truth, but it seems like the instances of candy poisoning aren't as common as a lot of people assume they are.
Right, and that's kind of what the study from Joel Best has done. He's been tracking the reports of these things every year. And then there was another incident here that I'm just trying to find the information. I should have highlighted it.
Is it that time that person threw that flaming bag of dog poop at a jack-o'-lantern and it blew up?
No, that was not.
That just happened to me, okay.
That happened to you.
No, I never did that.
But there was a case a while back where part of the candy tampering, it dates back to the 50s, and all these stories kind of started building from the 50s and 60s. There was another issue where a lot of Tylenol was tampered with.
Oh, this was a very infamous case.
And
yes.
This was a thing that actually did happen, and they never did solve it.
I believe this took place in the 1970s.
Yeah, I'm trying to find. I had it right here, and I can't seem to find the information. But that kind of was another thing that kind of started this. Oh, if this is happening here, what if it's happening here? I don't have the information in front of me, but that's another thing that kind of started and kind of ties in with the early days of these stories being told of Halloween candy maybe being poisoned. But the biggest case that I want to answer and talk about, and a lot of people don't count this as a thing, was what people call the case of the Candyman, or the man who killed Halloween. Are you familiar with this case?
I've seen Candyman before in 1992. It was such a scary movie. The bees really freaked me out. It's not that Candyman?
It's not that Candyman.
And it's not Sammy Davis Jr.?
Definitely not.
Okay, that's also pretty scary. But what is this Candyman case?
Okay, so in October on Halloween of 1974, there was a Texas man named Ronald O'Brien that gave out cyanide-laced pixie sticks to 5 children.
Oh.
One of which was his son. Unfortunately, his son ate the candy and died. So the other kids that were distributed the candy did not even have it. Part of the thing that was going on with this case was he was severely in debt, and he took out an insurance policy on his kids shortly before this, hoping to get some money for this. And obviously there was other problems going on with him at this time, but he was arrested, obviously, and he was eventually executed in the 80s. But this is kind of the only case to our knowledge where something like this has happened in an extreme way. So basically he wanted to claim this insurance policy because of his financial debt, which was $100,000 in debt. He was convicted in 75 of capital murder, although he denied it, and then executed in 84. So this is an extreme case, and because of this, obviously it was in the media a lot. So this made people even more kind of paranoid about these things. But again, as Joel Best has said in a few incidences, he's been interviewed apparently almost every year around Halloween time. It seems like he's kind of getting annoyed by it. I don't know, but he keeps saying it's not really happening, But anyways,
they just want the same soundbite from him every year.
This one case, obviously, is an extreme case. But what he says, and what some people in the articles here that I've gathered have said, is actually people are concerned about other people doing this, not about them doing it to their own family, right?
Oh.
But still, it's these weird things, these weird stories. So, here's this information that I'm putting out there. Does it happen? Not really. Can it happen? Absolutely. I guess the myth is not really a myth. It's based in fact. It has happened in small cases, and fortunately and unfortunately, there's only been, to our record here, one extreme case when this is had a fatal result.
Yeah. Now, we could go on about how parents can actually ensure that their children's candy is safe. We don't need to get into too much detail about it, but I think just covering the basics of just make sure the packaging's not tampered with, that you don't have open candy packages. If you do have apples, just inspect it. But even the myth about razor blades and apples to me has always been bizarre because you would still see a puncture somewhere within the skin of the apple.
Well, that's why they say to check if there's like a hole in it or something, or if something's unwrapped. Like when I was a kid, if something was unwrapped, we didn't even consider it. Like people would put random candy corns in your Halloween bag. That's bad enough. But
candy corn is like the curse of Halloween.
But all joking aside, you're putting it in just a random bag that kids are carrying. It's a little weird. At least put it in some type of package.
And I think that's another thing to adults who might be listening to this. Package loose candy or anything that might be like that because, just in terms of it being sanitary, it gets all over the bag. Who knows what's touching it? It's not really appropriate. And maybe just refrain from loose candy, buy packaged candy. It's so much easier. And there's so much Halloween candy for availability right now. You can go to a Dollarama or a dollar store and pick it up for pretty cheap.
Pretty cheap, yeah.
Yeah, so do that.
So that's I guess my side on this story, that Halloween candy being poisoned, is it being tampered with? For the most part, no. But it has happened in certain instances, and that's why we're saying still be cautious. But for the most part, it's kind of just a thing that people are always saying.
So, by and large, parents, don't be too paranoid about it. Let your kids go out and have fun, but do take precautions. And again, I do encourage you, check out your local branch of Windsor Public Library. There's lots of resources, including books, and we also have online resources teaching you the best practices for your children to safely trick-or-treat. Now, speaking of trick-or-treating, Dave, I'm very excited because normally you come in with a random Dave fact, but I'm going to come in with an awesome Adam question.
Wow, you really have a better name for it.
Well, it's alliteration. It's not that awesome, to be honest.
Okay.
So my question to you is about the act of trick-or-treating itself.
Uh-huh.
How long has trick-or-treating been around for?
I know it's been around a long time because people used to do a trick and in order to get a treat, right? There'd be trick or treat. That's what it is.
Well, it would be trick or treat.
Oh, trick or treat. Yes.
I mean, if you perform some sort of trick on somebody, they may not want to give you anything after.
Right, but I don't know how long. I'd say a really long time, like 1900s, maybe.
So you're thinking like 1900s, so 18th century,
maybe. Yeah.
Okay, well,
maybe not.
I'm gonna give you a little bit of a history lesson.
You tell me. Tell us. Tell everyone.
So what I'm going to talk about first is the origin of trick-or-treating back when it was not called trick-or-treating.
Okay.
It was called guising.
Guising.
Guising. What do you think that stands for, guising?
Like kind of pranks?
Well, no. Think about what that word sounds like, guising.
Geyser?
Well, hopefully not. I don't know what they're dressing up as for Halloween, but I hope they're not guising.
I don't know, Adam. I don't know.
Disguise.
Oh, guys. I get it.
Yeah, so
I was thinking different.
Well,
yeah.
It's okay. You were thinking very liquid, but no, this is a much more solid form of costume that people would wear. And this actually dates back to traditions in Scotland and Ireland as far back as the 16th century.
Oh, wow. So it has been around a little bit.
Yeah. So guising was the act of going house to house and putting on a small performance to be rewarded with food or treats. So the tradition of people also wearing costumes on Halloween also goes back to the 16th century. Sometimes people would guise and go out, not necessarily on Halloween, but for other festivals and activities. But it does go back a while. But this got me thinking about Halloween in North America because this original form of trick-or-treating, or as it was called, guising, is based in sort of tradition. It's based in festivals that were pertaining to religious beliefs at that time. In terms of how we know Halloween in North America and trick-or-treating in North America, how long ago do you think we started trick-or-treating?
I know it was before the 1950s.
That is true.
I don't know. I'd say maybe early 1900s.
Okay. So that's actually a pretty good guess. because in the 19th century, Halloween was celebrated with costume parties, parades, and other activities. But at this time, there were efforts made to basically domesticate the festival to conform to more Christian Victorian era ideals and morality. It was turned more into a private event rather than a holiday for children to go out.
Okay.
So with this domestication of it, it went from adults going out and guising, which was what guising originally was. It wasn't just for children, it was for people of all ages, to being something that was more of just a festival for children. So that happened in the 19th century. But this was all really taking place indoors. Trick-or-treating really wasn't a thing at that point. So as Halloween expanded and took root as this yearly tradition in North America, eventually it became something exclusively for children. Now, obviously, we're seeing Halloween parties for adults and celebrations that are for older people, but traditionally it was really aimed to be just a children-focused event in North America. Things started changing, though, in the early 20th century, where there was a lot more autonomy for children. They would go out dressed up in costumes for parties and parades, but then they would start taking up traditions of guising. And what is really cool about this is that going out on a Halloween night, the oldest report of it in North America is actually pretty close to us.
Yeah.
Where do you think it comes from?
Detroit.
No.
Toronto.
Closer.
Windsor.
I wish. That would be amazing. No, actually, Kingston, Ontario.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah. According to the Kingston Daily News, in 1866, it describes children going out on a Halloween night, and I quote, "They had their maskings and their merrymakings and preambulated the streets after dark in a way which no doubt was mightily amusing to themselves." End quote. Wow, I wish we still talked like that. That's amazing.
That's quite wordy.
Very preambulating. But with that said, that was more children going out for parades and just dressing up in costumes, not necessarily trick-or-treating. The earliest recorded instance of children trick-or-treating in North America is also pretty close to us. Take a guess where it is.
It's not Kingston.
Actually, it is.
Oh.
Kingston loves Halloween.
Okay.
Yeah, according to the Daily British Whig, which was a newspaper with a very amusing name that was principal around the Ontario area, a report in 1911 actually reported children guising around the neighborhood. So it still wasn't called trick-or-treating. It was still referred to as guising, but that was the first recorded instance of that taking place in North America.
Interesting.
Just one more Halloween factoid for you. This is all about the history of what trick-or-treating came to be. Originally called guising, this thing that was more of a folk and religious tradition done by all ages, and then eventually morphed into the celebration pretty exclusively only celebrated by children, but it was still called guising up until 1911. When do you think the first instance was recorded of this being called trick-or-treating?
1912.
You're going by Price is Right rules?
Yes.
Oh, yes.
$1.
$1.50. So the phrase trick-or-treat began use in central Canada and it eventually spread throughout the western United States and the rest of Canada. By the 1940s, the initial phrase had various forms, though, one of them being tricks or treats rather than trick-or-treat.
Okay.
And that was used in its earliest known case in a 1917 report from the Sault Daily Star in Sault Ste. Marie.
Mm-hmm.
So that's really the first recorded instance of trick-or-treating being called trick-or-treating.
Ah, interesting. I thought maybe the original name was Trick or Treat, Smell My Feet, Give Me Something Good to Eat.
Well, not quite.
Okay.
That came later. I couldn't find out where that poem came from.
Should we say the whole poem?
No, I don't think so.
Okay.
But,
most people know it. Yes.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure. But that was the first use of the phrase tricks or treats. Now, one day later, in another newspaper, also in Ontario, from an article in the Owen Sound Sun, they reported kids saying trick or treat at door fronts in 1917 in Chatsworth, Ontario. That was published one day after the article that I just mentioned in the Sioux Daily Star. So really at that point in 1917, we have two instances consecutively where this was called trick or treating. Kids would say trick or treat or some variation of it. And that's the origin. It actually has pretty strong Canadian history.
What about the first U.S. use of the word?
I don't know that.
Okay.
But I would encourage people, if they want more history on that, including the answer to your little query about what was the first U.S. instance of it, there was a wonderful book called Halloween, From Pagan Ritual to Party Night. That's written by Nicholas Rogers, and it is available to borrow at Windsor Public Library. I actually received most of the information from my question from this book. There's also another one called Death Makes a Holiday, A Cultural History of Halloween by David J. Schall, also available from Windsor Public Library. This also has a lot of information talking about how Halloween changed from this folk festival and ritual tradition into this secular tradition celebrated within North America with pumpkins and skeletons and candies and everything else that you associate with the holiday.
Interesting. Now, I have two more questions for you.
Whoa.
Okay. My first question is, why is it called Halloween?
I know there is All Hallows Eve.
Yes, but why is it called that?
Because All Fools Eve was taken.
I don't actually know the answer. I'm just asking.
Maybe I can look it up.
Perhaps.
So Halloween is commonly thought to have pagan origins, even though its etymology is Christian. Halloween is quite literally the popular derivative of All Hallow Even, or the Eve of All Saints' Day, November the 1st. That comes directly from Halloween, From Pagan Ritual to Party Night by Nicholas Rogers. And that makes sense, because sometimes you'll see Halloween spelt as one word, but then you'll see the apostrophe sometimes between the two E's at the end, which is that kind of amalgamation, that conjunction of Hallows and Eve. It's combining together. So it is a deviation. Dave, you're raising your hand, yes.
I have some information about the title from history.com. It actually means All Saints' Day. And it's derived, as you mentioned, from All Hallows Eve or All Hallow Muss. Maybe they'll call it Hallow Muss.
I love Hallowmas.
Anyways, and then it's a traditional of the Samhain in the Celtic religion.
That's right. And with that, it is
derived from that.
It's derived from it. It's not. A lot of people say it is like this continuation of Samhain or Samhain, but it's not. It's just kind of taking some folk traditions that people would celebrate that Celtic holiday with, and then those have just been adapted into Christian practices and other European practices throughout time in history. Like so much had been done from these ancient festivals. So with that said, that's the origin of Halloween as a word. You have another question, though.
Oh, yes. What is the worst Halloween treat you've ever received that you can recall?
I think the universal answer from any child is a toothbrush.
One time I got colored pencils.
At least colored pencils you can have fun with.
That's true.
A toothbrush, you're like, this is passive-aggressive at its best.
What about when someone puts a can of pop in your and then it gets all shaken up, and then it's like,
I have mixed feelings on that.
Why did you give me a can of pop?
Mm-hmm. Also vegetables, like not even fruit, but vegetables. Like, here's a nice carrot for you. It's the candy for rabbits.
Yeah. I don't know what else to say about that. I'm trying to think of other terrible Halloween candies I've received, but
there's those weird ones with the white powder on them. We already mentioned candy corn. That's just a sin against nature. Let's
not talk about that.
No.
But if anyone out there, as we mention often now at the end of the episode, has a question or something they want us to maybe talk about on the show, you can reach out to the Ask a Librarian section on our site.
Yeah, go to Ask a Librarian at windsorpubliclibrary.com. Send us your question, and in the subject heading, write fiction or nonfiction, and you can have a chance to have your question answered on the program.
Also, you can tell us, what is the worst Halloween candy that you've ever received?
Or your favorite. With that said, Dave, I'm very excited for Halloween. This is one of my favorite times of year, a great time to watch scary movies, dress up, party, see kids run around. It's a blast. With that said, let's go enjoy some Halloween fun and festivities. And until next time, folks, you've been listening to Fiction
or nonfiction.
Boo.